Welcome back. Just getting off the river today for the first time in way too long. Weatherman was forecasting gusts up to like 15 mile an hour, which for Montana, that's nothing. That's a walk in the park. I think my face is wind burnt. I think it was easily up to 40 mile an hour, which was not fun on the sticks. So that was a interesting day there. But got off the water early because of the wind, so we figured we'll shoot a couple videos today. Today we're going to tie a classic. We're going to go with the old school Black Nosed Dace. One of the original bucktail patterns from back in the day when streamers were really getting their start and really gaining in popularity. So we're going to go ahead and start on this one. This is an MFC 7050 size 2. It's a 3X long hook. Get that angled the right way here. And we're going to redo this one with the multi-cam setup and everything. Get a better look at this one. Gel spun 100 as always. Hi Madison. Hi buddy. Gel spun 100 as always. So with these old school patterns like that, they always have the bullet style thread heads, and it takes a while to perfect them, to get them to where they look like, it looks like it's just a mirror of thread, and that's just multiple coats from the head cement. It escaped me there for a second. Try and get my bearing back with me here. Getting beat up by the wind all day, kind of all over the place. But we're gonna go ahead and start with this one. Like I was saying, gel spun 100 for the thread, and I want a nice even thread base down here. So Madison's pretty interested in what we got going on here. So what happens on these bodies? It's not like the modern streamers that we're tying today, to where there's just so much like schlopping or UV puller for the body that will cover up any minute mistake that you may make or any thread bump. That's all going to get covered up by the stuff that we're doing today. These ones for the body, they're tinsel and wire. That's it. Any flaw in your thread wraps is going to be so apparent when you look at these things. It's going to be so apparent if someone tied this well and tied them properly. It's going to stick out like a sore thumb. So what we're going to do here is, as we go forward, I just want nice even wraps, and I cut off a piece that I wanted to make a point with on this. I cut off my tag end of force of habit. So I'm going to extend my tag end out a little bit. So I'm going to start with about that much thread, and I'm going to go right here. That's going to be the tie-in point for my bucktail. And I'm just going to open loop these wraps, and then I'm going to slide my thread back. Open loop and slide. Open loop and slide. And what that's doing is that's creating a nice even thread base throughout the entirety of this. With the gel spun, it's really easy because that thread's so thick, or so slick I should say. This moves pretty well for you. If you're using like a denier or something like that, it may not slide as easily, but it will still slide for you. So now that we have that, I'm just going to open loop this to where we started, and then I'm going to trim this off right there. So now you can see we have a really nice clean thread base throughout the entirety. None of this has a bunch of bumps. None of it has flaws throughout this, to where we're heavy on one end, we're light on another. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, this is just some, I don't even know what we used to tie. This is just yarn, is all it is essentially. When I was back home in Pennsylvania and we were fishing Lake Erie a lot, we would tie sucker spawn for the steelhead runs and everything. And this is what we would use, just these yarn, these pieces of yarn, and would do the 3 bumps. I did a video on it a while back, but we would use this stuff, and I don't know, I mean, it was cheap, it was readily accessible, and that was what we tended to use. But I got another application for it here. This is going to be the tag end. If you look at a lot of these old school patterns, they have that little bit of red sticking out the back. And 9 times out of 10, what they were using was just a little piece of yarn. So that's what we're going to throw on this right here. Now it's all twisted and everything. I mean, it's a braided piece of yarn, so I'm just going to run my fingers through there, kind of open that up a little bit. And it's just a little butt end, a little trigger point, whatever you want to reference it as. But yarn's probably one of your better things to use. You can use marabou, you can use some dyed pheasant tail. I would stay away from using anything that's really thick. Even marabou, like if you're not using the tips of it, it can wind up making a lot of bulk in your pattern. And if you don't have a really nice marabou plume, it can you wind up with the bumps. It just looks off. This right here, I mean, it looks pretty clean to me, and it's cheap. It's really easy to work with, and it doesn't build a ton of bulk through your body. As you can see, we still have everything really nice and clean there. There's no big bumps or anything like that. And then what I want to do is I'm going to go with some medium tinsel. And this is going to be the body on this one. I'm going to take out a decent length of this because I want to be able to use the rotary function and keep my hand out of the way of the back camera. So I'm going to use a good chunk of this. Let me get that back in there. There we go. And before I tie that portion in, I'm going to tie a rib section. Now this is completely optional. If you don't want to use this rib, you don't have to. I like it because it shores up the tinsel just a little bit more. It gives me a little bit more confidence that if a tooth gets in there, it's not going to, unravel that tinsel, which is really flimsy. I mean, it's really easy to get to bust that up and lose your fly. So this is just a medium silver tinsel wire, or a medium silver wire, I should say. Let me find some junk scissors here. If you want to, you can use a brassy or a small if you want to scale this wire down just a little bit. I like the medium. It seems to have a pretty good fit. And sticking with the theme that we've been using throughout the entirety of this, we're not starting this wire at the back where we'll typically tie them in. Like if you watch any of the videos, say we're doing a dungeon and you tie in a wire and that's going to be your counter wrap for your schloppen or your saddle. We start this at the back, we loop it over right there. That's going to create a massive bump that is just going to be so apparent. So we're going to start this at the very front, run it all the way to the back, and we're going to run it through the entirety of our body. Now I'm putting this on my side of the hook, okay? Because when I wrap this, I'm going to bring this around and I'm going to spiral it that direction, and it's going to look like a continuous piece. Like that wire's hidden. It's not like I'm going to have to make, if I were to start this on the other side, I would have to make a wrap, and then that wrap is going to not be, how do I explain this? That wrap is not going to be uniform with the rest of the wraps that I'm moving forward on this. So it's going to have kind of like a half turn, and then I'm going to have to shift my wraps in order to get them to be consistent, and it's still just not going to look quite right. So if you start this on your side of the hook as it sits right here, and then you take that underneath, by the time you make that first wrap, and you'll see it here in a little bit, it sits, it looks how it's supposed to. There's not like a half wrap that looks like it's out of place or whatever. it just looks like it was I don't even know the right adjective or word to use. It just looks how it's supposed to. That's how I'm going to keep it. I'm going to keep my simple Pennsylvania education there and not try and use words bigger than what I'm actually capable of using. How's that sound? It looks how it's supposed to. That's what we're going with. So, once again, leaving that space that we're going to be using to tie our bucktail and form our head with, we just have a couple of wraps on that tinsel. And before I go starting that tinsel, I got a half hitch in there. I'm just going to put a little bit of zap on here, just on the thread. And what this is going to do is it's going to help keep this tinsel in place. Let me see. Yeah, I do have a half hitch in there, so we'll get this in the cradle. It's just going to shore up your body a little bit more. You really don't have to do this first step if you don't want to, but I really think that it helps out, especially if you're using the wire. If you're counter wrapping this, you don't really need to do that. But if you're not using the wire, absolutely, you need to have that tinsel in place, or to have that thread down, or the glue. Man, the wind did a number on me today. So if you wind up on this, on your body I should say, if you wind up with a spot that is not completely covered, there's one spot right there where it's sticking up a little bit. There we go. Don't worry if you have a little gap right there on your first wrap through, because as you can see, we're making a second run right through this. And we're taking that right up to the front, and we have a nice, clean, continuous tinsel body that just unraveled because I let that get loose on me. I let that get loose. I should have made one more wrap behind it. I should have made one more wrap behind that. Getting carried away here. I'm out of practice with these old school patterns. So we're just wrapping that right through. And I'm actually going to take that a little bit further forward. There we go. Those couple of wraps there at the front really don't matter. They're going to get covered up with more wraps and bucktail and so on and so forth. These wraps here in the back are the ones that I'm concerned about. Right about at that point, right where I'm going to be starting my head. And let's go right there. So now, like I was saying before, with these wraps, I'm just going to wrap this one by hand. I'm going to have these running at about a 45-degree angle, going up to the front. Nice and even spacing, just keep nice even tension on that wire as you're going forward. There was one there, I got a little bit too much of a gap there. Typically I'd run this with the rotary function. I have a little bit better control just because I use that rotary function so much, but I'm just going to take this forward and we'll just do that by hand. Now we'll go ahead and get rid of this, just trim off that wire there, and we're ready to start our overwings and forming the head on this fly. So we're going to take this back to where we left off, right about there. I want about 1/4 inch for this head, and you can see the body on this. We have a nice smooth even body. There's not any bumps or anything. You can see this on the underneath side. It doesn't look like that one wire just came out of nowhere, because we tied it on this side right here, and then we went underneath and counter wrapped that wire. it just looks how it's supposed to, and then there's not one wrap that you have to here we go again, words are escaping me. There's not one wrap that you have to overcompensate for, I guess would be the best way to put that. So now we're going to go into our bucktail on this, and this is just 3 stacks of bucktail, and we're going to use white on the bottom, black on the top, and then brown, or black in the middle, and then brown on the top. So now typically on these, I don't stack the bucktail. I try and use it. I try and get it in my hand to be as even as possible. I just try and even these tips out. Let me get that where it's in the camera a little bit better there. I'm just trying to even these tips out. I don't need them perfect, but I do want them to where there's a little bit more bulk in that fly without using a ton of material. And with bucktail, if you want to get a ton of bulk, you've got to use a good chunk of this, and the fibers are non-compressible. It's going to build your head up really quick, and it's going to make it look really bulky. So I'm just going to get rid of some of these fibers here that are not going to be used, or if they're a little bit shorter, they're a little bit out of the way, or they're not really going to be in the fly. I just want to get those fibers to where I still have a decent amount of bulk right there as far as the profile that it's going to throw, but I don't have a ton of material in my hand. You'll see when I tie this down, I'll be able to compress this into almost nothing. Or I'll be able to have the head, the thread wraps, almost nothing, because I have so little material. Like I said, it's not compressible, but we're going to be able to take that down to where it's going to be manageable to work with, and we're not creating a ton of bulk. So there's our first overwing right there. And as you can see, I didn't explain this when I tied it in. When I tie these, I tie them, this is how I tie them. If you want to do them shorter, if you want to do whatever, that's fine. I take these, the overwing, I take the bucktail probably a quarter of the hook length past the bend of my hook. It just takes it back a little bit further. I just like to extend those out a little bit. I like to get a little bit of extra length out of them, and it throws a little bit better of a profile for this. You'll see some of them shorter, some of them longer. That's the distance that I tie these, or that I tie mine with. But if you want to adjust shorter or longer, by all means, do whatever looks better to you. But that's the length that I go with right there. And then once again, I'm just taking this black bucktail. This is going to be a little bit thinner. If you look at a Dace Minnow, I'm going to use a little bit less black than I use with the white and the brown. If you look at a Dace, it has that lateral line that runs back, and it's just a black lateral line that runs right down the center of it. It's a pretty distinct lateral line, and then the top is kind of this mottled brown black-ish. Sometimes there's some gray depending on what the substrate of the river is. But I'm just going to lay this over. You can see that sitting right back. I have it about the same distance as the white, maybe a little bit longer if you want to, but then I'm just going to take and cut that at an angle. And I'm going to set that, I'm going to tie this in a little bit further forward than where I tied in my white. And then I'm going to take that back and make sure that the black is running right over my white. I don't want it kicked off to one side or the other. You can see the black right there. The white is even on the underneath side. And I still don't have a ton of bulk right here for this head. I'm going to make a couple more wraps just to clean everything up slightly. Pick these up and just spread that around a little bit. Now what we're going to do on this one is a little bit different than I did in the last video. I'm going to use this section of the bucktail right here. This stuff that has that mottled black and brown. It kind of matches the naturals a little bit better. If you want to go with the straight brown, by all means, it's not going to make a huge difference. But it has like a little tan at the bottom, and I just like the way that this looks. I like the color breakup that you get out of this. So I'm going to try and take some fibers out of the center. The problem with this bucktail in particular, this stuff is a little bit shorter, so I'm going to have to take more fibers to get the look that I'm after. And on this one, I may stack it. As you can see, I have a lot more material there. I may stack this just to get my tips more even, and also to be able to get rid of some of that junk in there that isn't quite gonna make the cut. It's not gonna do what I need it to do, and it's just gonna add bulk. So let's just eliminate it. Just gonna get a quick stack on that. It didn't do a whole lot for me. There we go. That's a little bit better. That's a little bit better right there. I just want to find some of these tips that are a little bit off. Now, the one benefit to this from using that section of the bucktail is the closer you get to the hide, those fibers are a little bit more compressible, so it's not going to add as much bulk to your head when you're doing this. If you're using just the dyed brown bucktail and you're using this section right here, use a little bit less because it's going to add bulk to your head. So now what I want to do is just measure that out. I want it going the same length, maybe a little bit longer than my black. I'm going to take this and cut it at an angle, and I'm going to set that right in place. Just get one loose wrap on there. You can see that hair starting to flare a little bit. Get a loose wrap in there. These are still loose wraps. I'm just moving this forward until I'm getting right to the eye. I'm going to have a little bit longer. I may have to reset that if this doesn't work. I may have to reset that. No, I think we'll be good. We'll be good. I can clean that up a little bit if need be. So then I'm just taking this right through here, right where I started with my white, right where I tied that in. And now I'm starting to clamp down. Now that I have all of that bucktail tied into place there, I'm just going to take that and clamp that down just a little bit. I don't want to flare this too much, because if I flare it too much, you can see I have a couple fibers right here that are just kicking out because, like I said, it is compressible and it will flare for you a little bit. But if you just make some nice firm wraps right there at the base, at your tie-in point, and let me back that up just a little bit. I want to make sure that that head looks good. If you make some nice firm wraps right at your tie-in point, it's not going to flare it too much, and it's also going to hold your material in place how you want it. So I guess what I was trying to say there, that I was trying not to mess this up, is don't put so much tension if you're using this portion of your bucktail. If you're using the dyed section, you can get away with putting a little more tension on there and clamping that down up, slightly. But there you can see are three different distinct colors in that dace, with the black running that lateral line right down the sides. Actually rolled that just slightly on my side. It looks a little bit better on this side right there. than it does with the black lateral line. But once it's in the water, this stuff compresses. It's going to have that nice lateral line on both sides. But what we're going to do to finish this fly now, I'm going to move a little bit closer so I can see exactly what I'm doing here, is I'm just going to take this black marker and I'm going to touch up my thread, get a nice black section here for this nose. I didn't have any black thread, believe it or not. So I was like, well, I'll just use the gel spun and color it up. So there we have that. Then I want to take, and I'm not going to do the entire thing here. I'm just going to do the first wrap of this, or the first coat, if I can find it. Somewhere my head cement ran away from me. Somewhere my head cement ran away. No, I'm not going to paint that up. Anyhow, I'm not going to go through this section. I'll just speak through it. I spoke through it on a couple other videos where they do these bullet style thread heads. And what it is essentially is you're painting on your head cement in coats. You'll see them to where they're just this completely shiny, almost like a mirror finish on these heads. And how they do that is just by one coat after another. You take your head cement, you put your first coat on there, and what happens is that head cement starts going in between individual wraps of fiber, or individual wraps of thread, and it starts to smooth out a little bit. You wait until that dries, you throw on a second coat, it starts filling in the air gaps and everything. Let that dry, you throw in a third coat. Typically by your third coat you're good to go. You'll take a look at it. I mean, if it needs another coat, go ahead and throw on a fourth, whatever it may be. But typically 3 coats will get you right where it needs to be, and it's going to have that clean mirror finish. And this is something that they took a lot of pride in, you know, back in the day when they were tying these patterns. I think I mentioned that on the Joe Brooks Platinum Blonde. I think that was the video that I mentioned this on, and I may have actually gone through the process a little bit. But maybe one of these days I'll do like a tie-in tips or whatever it may be on these bullet style heads. But for now, that's going to finish this one up. As you can see right there, that is your Black Nosed Dace. In the Appalachians, man, these things are deadly. I've talked many times about how my uncles fish dace patterns, and they put some fish down. They kick for the lives, and they throw nothing but minnows, and man, they put some fish down. But that'll wrap this one up. If you guys have questions or comments on it, leave them with me and I'll get back to you. But thanks as always for watching, and we'll catch you on the next fly.